As state and federal governments grapple with the nation's energy crisis, one they helped create, it's instructive to look at how green ideology and subsidies have corrupted the market. Joining me now to give us the honest facts when it comes to all things energy and climate is best-selling author and president of the Centre for Industrial Progress, Alex Epstein. Alex, despite everything we know about the full cost of renewables, including the expensive battery backup, many Australians believe that renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy. I want to play for you a radio news report. This was the first item on a Triple M news service, and it helps explain why so many Australians are confused about energy costs and policies. I wonder if you'd be good enough to have a listen and give us an impromptu fact check.
Climate experts are warning the cost of electricity will struggle to improve until more renewables come online. Tristan Eders from Green Energy Markets says building more fossil fuel power stations will only make things worse.
The only solution is we've got to reduce our consumption of electricity through improved energy efficiency, and we need to drive construction of more wind and solar and battery storage so we're less reliant on that expensive and unreliable coal and gas.
What do you think about that, Alex? Coal is expensive and unreliable, and renewables are the way to drive down prices.
Yeah, well, this is like Orwellian language, freedom is slavery, fossil fuels are unreliable, unreliables are reliable. I call this the Tanya Harding case against fossil fuels, because it's basically saying, hey, we've crippled fossil fuels so much through this international movement to restrict their investment, production, refining, transportation, that we've created this crisis where we have skyrocketing energy prices. And so by that standard, the unreliables don't look so bad. But the problem is the unreliables are totally dependent on fossil fuels to work in the first place. Fossil fuels are totally involved in their supply chain. They can't replace fossil fuels at all. So the problem is the green movement is not only trying to mandate this inferior, unreliable energy, but they are handicapping fossil fuel energy, much as Tanya Harding handicapped Nancy Kerrigan. And that's not the approach, and they should be held to account for it. They shouldn't say, oh, we're right. See, fossil fuels are expensive after all. Yeah, because you made them expensive.
It is so Orwellian. That is the perfect way to describe what we're being told on a daily basis. And this corrupting of the market, it's not just down to all the subsidies, the taxpayer-funded subsidies, but there's also a great deal of pressure being put on banks and indeed all corporates to abide by what is called ESG guidelines, environmental, social and governance. Now, Michael Schellenberger calls ESG a propaganda effort pushed by climate activists to reduce investment in oil and gas production. But the impact, Alex, is so widespread from Sri Lanka to Germany to right here in Australia. And the end result seems to be more expensive and less reliable energy.
Yeah, and really more expensive and less reliable everything. So if you look at what ESG includes, it has it's environmental, social, and governance rather. And so the environmental really means, I talk about it in Fossil Future, which, by the way, I can't resist saying your outfit perfectly matches Fossil Future, which I really appreciate today. But anyway, in Fossil Future, I talk about how the modern environmental movement operates on the idea that human impact on nature is evil. So it's hostile ultimately to all forms of energy, including all the mining and development necessary for solar and wind, if those were practical. But it's also hostile to all impact, including fertilizer. So you have this maniacal anti-impact movement, which is really an anti-human movement. So they're literally starving the world by making too expensive the energy that powers agriculture and the fertilizer that is crucial to growing food for 8 billion people.
You're absolutely right there. And we saw what happens when those policies are enforced, like in Sri Lanka. The uprising was enormous. We've seen the mass protests in the Netherlands, and now Spanish farmers are also protesting against rising energy and fertiliser costs. But who is driving this agenda? I mean, we talk about the climate activists, but really, who are the powerful forces who are driving this agenda?
Well, you can think of it as, the leading, I call it in Fossil Future, our knowledge system, so the leading institutions and people we rely on for expert knowledge and guidance. And I argue they've totally failed. And really, they're operating on anti-human ideas. So it's kind of like a doctor who's on the side of the germs giving you advice on how to deal with the virus. That's really what they're doing, right? Because we want to know, how do we have low cost, reliable energy? And you notice that that guy who was using the Tanya Harding attack on fossil fuels, notice he also said, oh, we need to use efficiency, which just means less electricity. So his solution is for human beings to have less power. And that's really what this movement is about. And unfortunately, this anti-human idea that human impact is evil and should be eliminated has permeated so many of our leading institutions. So there are many corrupt people like Klaus Schwab and these kinds of goons, and Guterres, who runs the UN, who's a total thug. I mean, there are all these evil people, but it's really the anti-human ideas that we've accepted that empower these people. And so what we really need is pro-human thinking about energy, where we regard human impact on nature as a good thing when it advances human flourishing, which is most of the time.
We've had the assault against the private sector by the climate activists, but another massive issue is the government red tape hampering the production of cheap, reliable sources of energy. Let's hear from Australian Workers' Union Secretary Daniel Walton here.
At the moment, it takes the best part of nearly a decade to try and get a project up and off the ground. It's ridiculous in terms of the steps that we need to go through for environmental approvals and generally regulation approvals in this country to get these initiatives up.
Alex, we've got an energy crisis in this country. We've got prices soaring, not just for consumers, but for businesses. And as you heard there, projects are going through this 10 years of red tape before they can get underway, if they can get underway.
Yeah, so it's again this idea that human impact is bad. And so the idea is, if you're an industry that has a lot of impact, which every significant industry is, then you get to be treated as guilty until proven innocent. It actually resembles Australia's and to some extent the US's COVID strategy, right? Where everyone is treated as this evil virus carrier and you're not allowed to do anything until you prove that you're free of it. And in this case, it's you're not allowed to do anything until you satisfy green people that you're not going to impact nature, quote, too much. And the problem is you're guilty until proven innocent, but also the standard by which they're evaluating things is they think it's bad to impact things. So a lot of these people making the decisions and gumming up the works, they think all industry is bad. This is why the solar people are so gullible if they actually like solar, because the anti-impact people hate mining. They hate building massive transportation lines. They hate massive development. And so the biggest opponents of solar are actually the green members of the green movement. So we have to get rid of this whole anti-impact ideology. It has no place in government. It's a primitive anti-human religion. And I believe in the separation of religion and government.
Alex Epstein, always great to get your insights. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.